I thought my son Derek was finally showing me love after 3 years of cold shoulders and missed holidays. The handmade birthday chocolates arrived with a sweet note about wanting to reconnect. But when I mentioned giving them to his wife Sarah and the grandkids, his panicked scream through the phone made my blood freeze. "You did what?" His voice cracked with terror, not anger. That was the moment I realized those chocolates weren't meant to heal our relationship. They were meant to end my life. My name is Phyllis, and at 65 years old, I never imagined my own flesh and blood would try to murder me. But let me back up and tell you how I got to that horrifying realization on what should have been a joyful birthday morning. 3 years ago, my husband Frank passed away from a massive heart attack right here on our 200-acre farm in rural Ohio. We'd worked this land together for 37 years, raising Derek and watching him grow from a sweet little boy into what I thought was a successful man. Frank and I had built something beautiful together: rolling fields of corn and soybeans, a sturdy farmhouse with wraparound porches and barns that housed our small cattle operation. But Derek blamed me for his father's death. He claimed I stressed Frank out by refusing to sell our property to developers who'd been circling like vultures, offering obscene amounts of money, $3.2 million to be exact. Derek couldn't understand why I wouldn't take the money and move to some sterile assisted living facility in town. Mom, you're being selfish," he'd said at Frank's funeral, his voice sharp with resentment. "Dad died working this place. You're too old to manage it alone." Derek works as a pharmaceutical sales representative traveling across Ohio and Indiana, peddling the latest medications to doctors and hospitals. His wife Sarah works part-time at the veterinary clinic in town, and they have 2 beautiful children. My precious grandchildren Emma, who's 12, and Lucas, who just turned 9. Ever since Frank's passing, Derek has grown increasingly hostile toward me. Our Sunday family dinners became tense affairs, filled with his pointed comments about my declining health and unsafe living conditions. He'd walk through the house shaking his head at perfectly functional appliances, muttering about how I needed professional care. The visits became less frequent over the past year. Holidays passed without phone calls. When I'd try reaching out, Sarah would answer with strained politeness, making excuses about Derek being busy with work. The grandchildren stopped running to hug me when they visited. Everything felt cold, distant, broken. So when that FedEx package arrived on my 65th birthday last Tuesday, my heart leaped with hope. The return address showed Derek's name, and inside was the most beautiful box of artisanal chocolates I'd ever seen. 12 dark chocolate truffles, each one perfectly shaped and dusted with what looked like expensive cocoa powder. The handwritten note made my eyes well up with tears. "Mom, I know we've had our differences. These are made with love. Enjoy every bite. Love, always, Derek." I held that note against my chest and felt something ease inside me. Maybe my son had finally realized that family was more important than money. Maybe he understood that this farm wasn't just land and buildings. It was our legacy, our history, the place where he'd learned to ride bicycles and climb apple trees. I bit into one of the chocolates, immediately savoring what I thought was my son's gesture of reconciliation. The flavor was rich and complex, though there was an unusual bitter aftertaste that lingered on my tongue. I figured it was some kind of exotic chocolate blend, the kind of expensive delicacy Derek could afford with his pharmaceutical salary. The next morning, Wednesday, Derek called while I was feeding my chickens in the backyard. His voice sounded strangely urgent. "Mom, how are you feeling today?" "I'm wonderful, sweetheart. Thank you so much for the birthday chocolates. They were absolutely delicious." There was a pause. Then Derek asked, "So you ate them, all of them?" Something in his tone made me hesitate. Well, not all of them. Actually, I saved most of them for Sarah and the kids when they come to visit this weekend. You know how much they love sweets. The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Derek, are you there? You gave them to Sarah and the kids? His voice had changed completely. Gone was any warmth or concern. Now he sounded panicked, almost frantic. Yes, I thought it would be nice to share. They love chocolate and… You did what? Derek screamed so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear. Mom, tell me exactly how many you ate. His voice was shaking now, and I could hear his breathing becoming rapid and shallow. The terror in his voice sent chills down my spine. Derek, what's wrong? I only ate one. The rest are wrapped up in the refrigerator for… The line went dead. He'd hung up on me. I stood there in my kitchen, still holding the phone, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Why was Derek so upset about me sharing the chocolates? Why did he sound terrified rather than angry? Then a memory surfaced that made my blood run cold. Derek had access to all kinds of pharmaceutical samples and chemicals through his work. He'd mentioned in passing how easy it would be for someone with medical knowledge to hurt people without anyone suspecting. I looked toward the refrigerator where the remaining 11 chocolates sat waiting for my family's visit. For the first time since receiving them, I felt genuinely afraid. Walking over to the kitchen counter, I noticed something I'd missed before. One chocolate had rolled under the table during unpacking and sat there forgotten. Some instinct told me to pick it up and put it in a sealed plastic bag. If my son was capable of what I was beginning to suspect, I was going to need proof. That afternoon, my daughter-in-law Sarah called, and the worry in her voice confirmed my worst fears were justified. Phyllis, I need to ask you something strange. Sarah began, her voice tight with anxiety. Derek has been acting really weird since this morning. Pacing around the house, checking his phone, constantly asking me over and over if the kids and I are feeling okay. My heart started racing. Did you and the children eat the chocolates I saved for you? Yes, we had them with lunch. They were delicious, though Emma said they tasted kind of metallic. Both kids complained of stomach aches afterward, but I figured they just ate too many. Sarah paused. Phyllis, Derek asked me 3 times if we finished all of them. When I said yes, he looked like he was going to be sick. The pieces were falling into place, creating a picture so horrifying I could barely accept it. But I had to know for sure. Sarah, has Derek mentioned anything about my will lately, or life insurance? Another pause, longer this time. Actually, yes. Last month, he asked me to witness some papers he said were for life insurance policies. He told me they were for his own coverage, but now that I think about it, the paperwork had your name on it, not his. Life insurance policies on me, the chocolates, Derek's pharmaceutical knowledge, his desperate need for money to buy the farm from my estate. Sarah, I need you to listen carefully. Don't let Derek know we had this conversation. If either of the children feels worse, take them to the emergency room immediately and tell the doctors they may have ingested something toxic. Phyllis, you're scaring me. What's going on? I'm not sure yet, but I'm going to find out. After hanging up, I drove my old pickup truck into town, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. My first stop was the county library, where I spent 2 hours researching chocolate poisoning and toxic substances that could be easily obtained by someone in Derek's profession. What I found made me sick to my stomach. Thallium, a heavy metal once used in rat poison, was tasteless and odorless when mixed into food. It caused nausea, stomach pain, and eventual organ failure. Someone with access to pharmaceutical supplies could potentially obtain it through research chemical companies. The symptoms matched exactly what Sarah had described in Emma and Lucas. My next stop was the law office of Margaret Hendricks, who'd been our family attorney for 25 years. Margaret was a sharp woman in her 70s who'd helped Frank and me set up our wills and estate planning. Phyllis, you look terrible. What's wrong? Margaret asked as I settled into the chair across from her desk. I explained everything. Derek's behavior, the chocolate, Sarah's phone call, my research at the library. Margaret listened without interruption, her expression growing more serious with each detail. I need to see your will again, Margaret. And I need to know if Derek has been asking you questions about probate procedures. Margaret pulled out my file, her lips pressed into a thin line. Phyllis, I didn't want to worry you, but Derek has called here 6 times in the past 2 months. He's been asking about how quickly estates can be settled, whether there are ways to expedite probate, and what happens to property when someone dies intestate. She opened my will to the beneficiary page. Everything, the farm, my savings, my life insurance, went to Derek as my sole heir. Frank and I had set it up that way years ago, back when Derek was a loving son who visited every weekend and brought the grandchildren to help with chores. Margaret, I need that chocolate tested by a private laboratory. Can you recommend someone who won't ask questions? There's a forensic lab in Columbus that does work for insurance companies. They're discreet and thorough. She wrote down the contact information. Phyllis, if what you're suggesting is true, we need to involve the police. Not yet. I need proof first. If I'm wrong, I'll have destroyed my relationship with my son forever. If I'm right... I couldn't finish the sentence. The drive to Columbus took 2 hours. The forensic laboratory was housed in a nondescript office building, and the technician who met with me was a serious young man named Dr. Peterson, who asked no questions about why I needed chocolate analyzed for toxins. Results will be ready Friday morning, he told me. We'll test for the full spectrum of poisons and toxic substances. Friday morning, Dr. Peterson called with results that confirmed my worst nightmare. Ma'am, that chocolate contained lethal levels of thallium sulfate, enough to kill an adult woman within 48 to 72 hours. Whoever made this was trying to commit murder. I thanked him and hung up, then sat in my kitchen staring at the phone. My son had tried to kill me. My own child, the baby I'd nursed through childhood illnesses and cheered at high school graduation, had decided my death was worth $3.2 million. But Derek didn't know I was still alive and aware of his plan. He thought Sarah and the children had eaten the poisoned chocolates, which meant he believed his scheme had failed but hadn't been discovered. I needed to be smarter than Derek. I needed evidence that would hold up in court. And I needed to protect Sarah and the grandchildren from whatever desperate measure he might try next. That evening, I called Derek's house and invited the family for Sunday dinner, just like the old days. My voice was cheerful and grandmotherly as I spoke to Sarah. I've been feeling a little under the weather since my birthday, but I'm much better now. I thought it would be nice to have everyone together. When Derek got on the phone, I made sure to sound slightly weak and tired. Hi, sweetheart. I hope you're not still upset about the chocolates. I just wanted to share something special with my family. No, Mom, of course not. I was just worried about you eating too much sugar with your diabetes. His lie rolled off his tongue so easily it made me nauseous. Derek was counting on my death probably within days. The Sunday dinner invitation would give him a chance to assess whether his backup plan needed to be implemented. I spent Saturday setting up my old cassette recorder, one of Frank's antique electronics, that still worked perfectly. I hid it inside the dining room hutch where Derek would never think to look. If my son was going to incriminate himself, I was going to capture every word. Sunday morning, I stood at my kitchen window watching Derek's car pull into the driveway. Sarah got out first, followed by Emma and Lucas. Derek emerged last, moving slowly, his eyes scanning the house like he was assessing a crime scene. As they walked toward the front door, I saw Derek pull out his cell phone and make a quick call. She should be dead by now. His voice carried through the open window. When can we start the probate process? I gripped the windowsill so hard my knuckles turned white. There was no doubt left. No room for misunderstanding or wishful thinking. My son was a would-be murderer, and he was about to walk into my house expecting to find either a corpse or a woman too poisoned to resist whatever he planned next. But Derek was in for the surprise of his life. Sunday dinner became the performance of my lifetime. I had to appear slightly unwell without seeming suspicious, weak enough that Derek would believe his poison was working slowly, but alert enough to gather evidence of his true intentions. When Derek walked into my kitchen, his face went pale. He'd been expecting to find me incapacitated or worse, and instead I was standing at the stove stirring gravy, looking tired but functional. Mom, you don't look so good," he said, his voice carefully modulated to sound concerned. "Maybe you should sit down and let Sarah finish cooking." "I'm just feeling a bit sluggish today, honey. Probably coming down with something." I made my voice slightly breathless, as if speaking required effort. "But I wanted to make your favorite pot roast." Derek kept checking his watch throughout dinner preparation. Every few minutes he'd study my face like he was looking for signs of deterioration. When I pretended to stumble slightly while carrying plates to the table, his eyes lit up with what looked like anticipation. Sarah, bless her heart, seemed genuinely worried about my health. She kept offering to help with kitchen tasks and suggested I see a doctor about my fatigue. The children were quieter than usual, still recovering from their chocolate-induced stomach problems, though thankfully the small amount they'd consumed hadn't caused serious harm. During dinner, I excused myself to use the bathroom and activated the hidden cassette recorder. When I returned, Derek was whispering urgently to Sarah, "I think she's getting worse. Look how shaky her hands are." I'd been deliberately making my movements slightly unsteady, and Derek was interpreting every gesture as confirmation that his plan was working. The level of calculation in his voice made my stomach turn. "Derek, your mother seems fine to me," Sarah replied. "A little tired maybe, but nothing alarming. Trust me, I know what to look for. We might need to take her to the hospital soon." The way he said hospital sent chills through me. I suspected Derek's plan involved getting me to a medical facility where he could somehow finish what the chocolates had started. Perhaps he had contacts there, or maybe he simply wanted to be present when I supposedly died from natural causes. After dinner, while Sarah was helping the children with homework in the living room, Derek offered to help me clean dishes. Once we were alone in the kitchen, his mask slipped slightly. "Mom, have you been taking your diabetes medication regularly? Sometimes when blood sugar gets unstable, it can cause confusion memory problems." He was laying groundwork for a narrative that would explain away any evidence I might have gathered. If I'd discovered his plan, Derek could claim I was suffering from diabetic episodes that caused paranoid delusions. "I take my medicine every morning, just like Dr. Williams prescribed." Sometimes people think they're taking medication correctly, but they make mistakes. Derek moved closer, his voice taking on a patronizing tone. "It might be time to consider getting some help managing your health care." While we talked, Derek kept glancing toward the stairs leading to the second floor. When I stepped outside to bring in laundry from the line, I watched through the kitchen window as he quickly went upstairs. He was up there for nearly 10 minutes. When the family left that evening, I immediately went to my bedroom to see what Derek had been doing. My medication bottles had been moved slightly on the nightstand. The cap on my diabetes medication wasn't screwed on as tightly as I always left it. I opened the bottle and examined the pills. They looked identical to my normal medication, but something felt wrong. Using a magnifying glass Frank had left in his dresser drawer, I studied one of the pills more closely. There were tiny pinholes in several of the capsules, so small they were nearly invisible. Derek had injected something into my diabetes medication, probably more thallium. He was ensuring that even if the chocolates failed, my daily medication would finish the job. The next morning, Derek called to check on me. How are you feeling today, Mom? Any dizziness or nausea? I'm managing, sweetheart, though I did have some stomach upset last night. That's concerning. Maybe you should see Dr. Williams this week. Actually, Derek, that's a good idea. Could you drive me to my appointment? I'm not sure I trust myself behind the wheel right now. The eagerness in his voice was unmistakable. Of course, Mom. I'll take the day off work. We should go as soon as possible. After hanging up, I carefully disposed of the tampered medication and replaced it with vitamins that looked similar. If Derek was monitoring my health decline, I needed to control the narrative. That afternoon, Sarah stopped by unexpectedly while Derek was at work. She looked exhausted and worried. Phyllis, I need to tell you something, but I don't know how to say it. Just speak honestly, dear. Derek has been acting so strange lately. He cleaned out our savings account last week without telling me. When I asked about it, he said we'd be rich soon and could pay off the mortgage. Sarah sat down heavily at my kitchen table. He's been getting phone calls at odd hours talking in whispers. And yesterday, I found him researching how to file insurance claims and something about medical directives. Medical directives. Derek was preparing to make healthcare decisions on my behalf once I became incapacitated. He probably planned to refuse life-sustaining treatment or authorize procedures that would ensure my death. Sarah, has Derek ever mentioned feeling pressure about money debts or financial problems? He's always stressed about money, but lately it's been extreme. He mentioned something about people he owed money to, but when I tried to ask questions, he got angry and told me to mind my own business. A picture was forming of Derek's desperation. He wasn't just greedy for inheritance money. He was in serious financial trouble and saw my death as his only way out. That evening, Derek arrived with homemade chicken soup, claiming Sarah had made it specially for my illness. She was worried after seeing you yesterday, said you looked pale and weak. The soup smelled delicious, but I'd learned not to trust anything Derek brought into my house. While he was in the bathroom, I quickly poured most of the soup into a mason jar and hid it in the pantry, replacing it with canned soup. I heated up and poured into the same bowl. This is wonderful, I told Derek after taking a few spoonfuls. Tell Sarah I appreciate her thoughtfulness. Derek watched intently as I pretended to eat. When I claimed to be too tired to finish, he seemed satisfied and left shortly afterward. The next morning, I fed the remaining soup to my chickens as an experiment. Within 4 hours, 3 of them were dead. I carefully collected the dead chickens and stored them in my freezer, as evidence, then drove to Columbus to have the soup analyzed. Dr. Peterson's lab confirmed massive thallium contamination, enough to kill a healthy adult within hours. Derek wasn't just trying to poison me gradually. He was escalating his attempts, growing impatient with the slow pace of his original plan. When Derek called that evening to check on me, I made sure to sound weaker and more confused than before. I'm feeling much worse today, honey, very dizzy and nauseous, and I can't seem to remember things clearly. Mom, that sounds serious. I really think we need to get you to a hospital tonight. Maybe tomorrow. I just want to rest. No, Mom, this can't wait. I'm coming over right now to take you to the emergency room. The urgency in his voice told me everything I needed to know. Derek believed his poison was finally working, and he wanted to be present at the hospital when I died. He probably planned to play the grieving son, making sure the medical staff saw him as devastated by his mother's sudden decline. But I wasn't ready to spring my trap yet. I needed more evidence, more proof of premeditation. Derek had been careful to cover his tracks, and I needed documentation that would convince a prosecutor to file murder charges. Derek, I don't want to go to the hospital tonight. I hate those places. If I'm not better tomorrow, I promise I'll see Dr. Williams. His frustration was obvious. Mom, you're not thinking clearly. This could be diabetic ketoacidosis or a stroke. You need medical attention now. Please, sweetheart, just let me rest tonight. I'll call you in the morning. After much argument, Derek reluctantly agreed to wait until morning, but I could hear the calculation in his voice as he said goodbye. He was already planning his next move. That night I found Derek's notebook. He'd left it in his car during Sunday dinner, and something had prompted me to look inside when I'd walked him out to the driveway. The notebook was filled with detailed plans written in Derek's neat handwriting. Timeline for Mom's passing, followed by dates, medical scenarios, and financial calculations. Funeral arrangements with costs and contact information for funeral homes. Property sale process, including Braxton's contact information and projected timelines for closing. The final entry, dated just 2 days earlier, was the most chilling. If Mom doesn't die soon, we'll need to stage accident. Can't wait much longer. Creditors getting impatient. Derek wasn't just planning my murder anymore. He was planning to make it look accidental if the poisoning didn't work quickly enough. I photographed every page of that notebook with my old digital camera, making sure the images were clear enough to read. Then I carefully placed the notebook back exactly where I'd found it. My son had become a desperate, calculating killer, but Derek had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated his mother's intelligence and determination to survive. The trap was almost ready. I just needed to decide when to spring it. The next morning, I made the hardest phone call of my life. I contacted Detective Rosa Valdez at the county sheriff's office, a woman I'd known peripherally through community events, but had never spoken to about anything more serious than a church fundraiser. "Detective Valdez, I need to report an attempted murder." There was a pause. "Ma'am, are you in immediate danger right now?" "I don't think so, but my son is trying to kill me and I have evidence." Rosa agreed to meet me at a coffee shop in town rather than at the police station. I suspected Derek might be monitoring my activities, and I didn't want him to know I'd involved law enforcement until I was ready. Detective Valdez was a compact woman in her 40s, with intelligent dark eyes and an air of quiet competence. She listened without interruption as I laid out the entire story, showing her the lab reports, the photographs of Derek's notebook, and the evidence of the tampered medication. "Mrs. Henderson, these are serious allegations. Attempted murder is a capital offense in Ohio." "I understand that. But I also understand that Derek is desperate enough to try again, probably very soon. He thinks his poison is working slowly, but he's growing impatient." Rosa studied the lab reports carefully. "This level of thallium contamination is definitely lethal, and you said you have recordings of him discussing your death?" I played the cassette tape from Sunday dinner. Derek's voice was crystal clear as he discussed probate timelines and expressed frustration at my continued survival. "We need to set up official surveillance," Rosa decided. "And I want you to wear a wire during any future contact with your son. But Mrs. Henderson, I have to ask, are you prepared for the possibility that your son will spend the rest of his life in prison?" "Detective, I'm prepared for the possibility that if we don't stop him, I'll be dead within the week." Rosa and I spent the next 2 hours developing a strategy. She would obtain warrants for Derek's phone records, financial statements, and computer files. Meanwhile, I would continue playing the role of a slowly dying woman while gathering more evidence. "One thing bothers me," Rosa said as we prepared to leave. "Your son must be in serious financial trouble to take such extreme risks. People don't usually attempt to murder family members unless they're facing catastrophic consequences." That afternoon, I visited Harold Braxton's real estate office downtown. Braxton was a heavy-set man in his 60s, with the smooth manner of someone accustomed to manipulating vulnerable people. "Mrs. Henderson, what a pleasant surprise. I was just thinking about you and that beautiful property of yours. Mr. Braxton, I understand my son Derek has been in contact with you about possibly selling the farm." Braxton's expression became guarded. "Well, yes, he did mention that you might be interested in discussing your options. Real estate markets are very strong right now for agricultural properties near development corridors." I'm curious about the details of those discussions. I probably shouldn't say much without Derek being present, but he did indicate you were considering a sale due to health concerns. In fact, he seemed quite confident that a decision would be made very soon. The implication was clear. Derek had told Braxton I would be dead or incapacitated within a matter of days, clearing the way for an immediate property sale. Did Derek mention any specific timeline for this decision? He said something about early next week being ideal, mentioned that family circumstances were about to change dramatically. Braxton leaned forward conspiratorially. Between you and me, Mrs. Henderson, your son seemed very eager to move forward. He even signed some preliminary paperwork giving our company first rights to the property. Derek had signed agreements to sell my farm before I was even dead. The level of premeditation was staggering. When I left Braxton's office, I drove straight to Margaret Hendricks to share this new information. Phyllis, this is getting more serious by the hour. Derek has been busy setting up a complete framework for profiting from your death. Margaret had done her own investigation into Derek's financial situation through contacts at various banks and credit agencies. What she'd discovered painted a picture of a man in desperate financial straits. Derek owes $180,000 in gambling debts to some very dangerous people. His house is in foreclosure. His credit cards are maxed out. And his employer has been investigating him for missing pharmaceutical inventory. Missing inventory. Apparently, several controlled substances have disappeared from Derek's sample case over the past 6 months. Nothing recreational, mostly heavy metals and compounds used in research, the kind of things that could be used to poison someone. The evidence was mounting into an overwhelming case against my son, but Rosa had warned me that we needed to catch Derek in the act of another murder attempt to ensure conviction. Circumstantial evidence, no matter how compelling, might not be enough to put him away for life. That evening, Sarah came to my house alone. The children were at their grandmother's house, and Derek was working late. She looked haggard and frightened. Phyllis, I found something on Derek's laptop, and I don't know what to do about it. Sarah handed me a flash drive. I copied his browser history and some documents I found hidden in his files. The contents were horrifying. Derek had been researching thallium poisoning for months, reading medical journals about symptoms and lethality. He'd visited websites about inheritance law, life insurance claims, and the probate process. Most disturbing of all were the veterinary supply websites, where he'd researched purchasing thallium sulfate under the guise of pest control. But the most damning evidence was a detailed timeline document titled Project Freedom. It outlined Derek's entire plan from the initial poisoning through my funeral and the subsequent property sale. The document even included contingency plans for different scenarios: what to do if I survived the initial poisoning, how to escalate the attempts, and ways to make my death appear natural. Sarah, when did Derek create these files? Some of them go back almost a year. He started planning this right after your husband's funeral. Derek had been plotting my murder since Frank's death, waiting for the right opportunity to inherit the farm and solve his financial problems. There's something else, Sarah continued. Derek has been meeting with some men I don't recognize. They come to the house late at night, and Derek always sends me and the kids upstairs. I heard him talking about owing money to dangerous people. Sarah, I need to ask you something directly. Did you know about any of Derek's plans? Tears started flowing down her face. I swear I didn't know he was trying to hurt you, but I knew something was wrong. He's been threatening to take Emma and Lucas away from me if I asked too many questions. He said if I didn't cooperate with his business plans, he'd make sure I never saw my children again. Derek had been manipulating and threatening his own wife to ensure her silence. The man I'd raised had become a monster willing to destroy anyone who stood between him and my money. Sarah, Detective Valdez needs to hear all of this. We're building a case against Derek, but we need your testimony. I'm scared, Phyllis. If Derek finds out I've been talking to you, I don't know what he'll do. He's not going to have the opportunity to hurt anyone much longer. That night, Rosa set up surveillance equipment around my property. Hidden cameras in the barn, motion detectors along the driveway, and audio recording devices in my house. If Derek attempted to stage an accident or make another poisoning attempt, every moment would be captured. The next morning, Derek called early. "Mom, you sound terrible. I'm coming over right now to take you to the emergency room." "Derek, I don't think I can make it that far. I'm so weak I can barely stand." "Then I'll call an ambulance." "No, please don't. I just need to rest." "Mom, this is ridiculous. You could die if we don't get you medical attention." The irony of Derek expressing concern about my death while actively trying to cause it would have been funny if it wasn't so terrifying. "Just come over and sit with me for a while. If I get worse, then we'll talk about the hospital." Derek agreed, probably figuring this would be his opportunity to finish me off personally. An hour later, his car pulled into my driveway. Through the window, I watched him take a long phone call before getting out of the car. "Everything's almost ready," I heard him say. "She should be gone by tonight, and then we can start the process." Derek walked into my house carrying a small bag that he claimed contained medicine from one of his pharmaceutical contacts. "This should help with your nausea and dizziness, Mom. My colleague said it's very effective for the kind of symptoms you're experiencing." The bottle contained unmarked white pills that looked nothing like any legitimate medication I'd ever seen. "Derek, I appreciate you trying to help, but I'd rather stick with my regular doctors." "Mom, you're not thinking clearly. Dr. Williams doesn't understand your condition like my colleagues do. This medication could save your life." Derek's insistence was becoming aggressive. When I continued to refuse the pills, he started pressuring me more forcefully. "You have to take this now, Mom. Your condition is deteriorating rapidly." "Derek, why are you so upset about me not taking medicine from someone I don't know?" "Because I'm trying to help you and you're being stubborn and unreasonable." His mask was finally slipping. The caring son act was giving way to frustration and desperation. "I need to use the bathroom," I told Derek, excusing myself to activate the recording equipment Rosa had installed. When I returned to the kitchen, Derek was standing by the coffee pot with his back to me. I watched as he poured something from a small vial into my coffee cup. "I made you some fresh coffee, Mom. It might help settle your stomach." This was it. Derek was making his final attempt and everything was being recorded. I pretended to take a sip of the coffee, then set it down. "It tastes strange, Derek. What did you put in it?" "Nothing, Mom. It's just regular coffee." "Derek, I know what you've been doing. I know about the thallium in the chocolates, the poisoned soup, the medication you tampered with." Derek's face went completely white. For a moment, he looked like the scared little boy he used to be when caught in a lie. Then his expression hardened into something cold and calculating. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I have lab reports, Derek. I have recordings of your phone conversations. I know about your gambling debts and your agreement with Harold Braxton." Derek stared at me for a long moment, and I watched as he realized his careful plan had completely unraveled. "You don't understand the situation I'm in, Mom. There are people who will kill me if I don't pay them back. I need that money." "So you decided to kill me for it?" "I never wanted to hurt you, but I'm out of options. Those men gave me 2 weeks to come up with the money or they'll kill Sarah and the kids too." Derek was trying to justify attempted murder by claiming he was protecting his family. But I knew from Sarah's testimony that he'd been threatening her and the children, not protecting them. "Derek, there were other options. You could have asked for help. You could have declared bankruptcy. You could have sold your own house." "None of that would have been enough." Derek's voice was rising, becoming more frantic. "Do you have any idea how much money I owe? The farm is the only asset valuable enough to solve this problem." "So you decided I had to die?" "I thought it would be peaceful. The thallium would have made you sick gradually like a natural illness. No one would have suspected anything. Derek was confessing to attempted murder, and every word was being recorded by Rosa's equipment. But then you gave the chocolates away and everything got complicated. I had to try other methods. Like injecting poison into my diabetes medication. Derek looked surprised that I knew about that particular attempt. You were supposed to die quietly in your sleep. It would have looked like diabetic complications. And the soup Sarah supposedly made for me, that was supposed to finish the job quickly. I was running out of time. Derek was providing a complete confession detailing each murder attempt and his reasoning, but something in his posture was changing, becoming more threatening. Mom, I can't let you ruin this. Too much depends on it. Derek reached into his jacket and pulled out a gun. I didn't want it to come to this, but you've left me no choice. The sight of Derek pointing a gun at me should have been terrifying, but instead, I felt a strange calm settle over me. This was the moment I'd been preparing for the final piece of evidence that would put my son away forever. Derek put the gun down. This isn't going to solve your problems. Actually, it will solve everything. I'll tell the police I came over to check on you and found you dead. Natural causes, just like we planned originally. Derek's hands were shaking as he held the weapon, and I could see sweat beading on his forehead. He was scared and desperate, which made him even more dangerous. You really think you can shoot me and claim it was natural causes? I'll stage it to look like you fell and hit your head. Old woman living alone, health problems, accidents happen. The level of detail in Derek's improvised plan told me he'd been thinking about backup scenarios for weeks. He'd probably researched different ways to kill me that would avoid suspicion. Derek, the police already know what you've been doing. I've given them evidence. You're lying. You're just trying to scare me. I have recordings of you talking about my death. Lab reports showing the poison in the chocolates. Documentation of your financial problems and your agreement with Harold Braxton. Derek's expression wavered between doubt and determination. He wanted to believe I was bluffing, but something in my voice told him I was telling the truth. Even if that's true, it doesn't matter now. Dead people can't testify. But living people can, and Sarah knows everything. She's already spoken to Detective Valdez. At the mention of his wife's name, Derek's face contorted with rage. Sarah was supposed to keep her mouth shut. I told her what would happen if she interfered. You mean you threatened your own wife and children to cover up your murder plot? I was protecting them. If I don't pay back the money I owe, those men will hurt my family. Sarah should understand that everything I'm doing is for her and the kids. Derek's twisted logic was the reasoning of a man who'd convinced himself that committing murder was somehow noble. He'd rationalized away the moral implications of killing me by focusing on his financial desperation. Derek, who are these men you owe money to? Maybe we can work out a different solution. It's too late for that. They want their money by Friday or they start hurting people I care about. Today was Thursday. Derek believed he had less than 24 hours to access my inheritance money, which explained his increasing desperation and willingness to abandon subtle murder methods in favor of direct violence. How did you get involved with dangerous people like that? It started small, just a few bets on basketball games to make some extra money. But I kept losing, and they kept offering to let me double down to win back what I owed. Derek was describing the classic pattern of gambling addiction and predatory lending. Someone had deliberately trapped him in an ever-increasing cycle of debt. So you decided killing me was easier than facing your mistakes. I tried everything else first. I applied for loans. I sold everything I could. I even considered declaring bankruptcy. But the amount I owe is too much for any legitimate solution. Derek, even if you kill me tonight, it will take weeks or months to settle my estate and access the money. How does that solve your immediate problem? For the first time, Derek looked uncertain. He'd been so focused on the inheritance as his salvation that he hadn't fully considered the practical timeline involved. Braxton said he could expedite the sale if there was an immediate need, family emergency circumstances. Harold Braxton had been coaching Derek on ways to liquidate my assets quickly after my death. The real estate developer was clearly a willing participant in this murder scheme, probably planning to buy my farm at below market value from a desperate heir. Derek, think about what you're doing. If you kill me, you'll spend the rest of your life in prison. Emma and Lucas will grow up knowing their father is a murderer. Is that really better than facing your gambling debts? The kids will understand when they're older. They'll have financial security because of the farm money. Derek had constructed an elaborate fantasy where murdering me was actually a sacrifice for his children's benefit. The level of self-deception was staggering. At that moment, the kitchen door burst open, and Detective Rosa Valdez entered with her weapon drawn, followed by 2 uniformed officers. "Derek Henderson, drop your weapon immediately." Derek spun toward the officers, his gun still pointed in my general direction. For a terrifying moment, I thought he might try to shoot his way out of this situation. "It's over, Derek," Rosa said in a calm, authoritative voice. "We have everything recorded. Put the gun down and step away from your mother." "You don't understand," Derek said, his voice breaking. "I have to do this. My family will die if I don't get that money." "Your family is safe, Derek. We've already taken Sarah and the children into protective custody. Whatever threats were made against them, we can handle those problems without anyone getting hurt." The mention of Sarah and the children being protected seemed to deflate Derek's resolve. The gun in his hands started to waver. "They're really safe. They're at a secure location with family services officers. Now put the weapon down before someone gets hurt." Derek looked around the kitchen as if seeing it clearly for the first time. The gun in his hands, the police officers, his elderly mother cowering against the counter. The reality of what he'd been about to do finally seemed to penetrate his desperation. "I never wanted it to come to this," he whispered slowly, lowering the gun to the counter. Rosa moved quickly to secure the weapon while one of the uniformed officers cuffed Derek's hands behind his back. "Derek Henderson, you're under arrest for attempted murder conspiracy to commit murder and assault with a deadly weapon." As Rosa read Derek his rights, he looked at me with tears streaming down his face. "Mom, I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. I just didn't know what else to do." "Derek, there were always other choices. You just convinced yourself this was the only way." "Will you tell Emma and Lucas that I love them?" "I'll tell them their father made some terrible mistakes, but I'll also make sure they know you loved them." Derek nodded gratefully as the officers led him toward the door. At the threshold, he turned back one more time. "Mom, I hope someday you can forgive me." "I forgive you, Derek, but forgiveness doesn't mean there won't be consequences." After Derek was loaded into the police car, Rosa sat with me at my kitchen table to review what had happened. "Mrs. Henderson, that was incredibly brave, but also incredibly dangerous. If we hadn't been monitoring the situation, Derek might have actually shot you. I knew you were listening, and I needed Derek to confess everything on record." "Well, he certainly did that. We have him admitting to multiple murder attempts, detailing his methods and explaining his motives. Any competent prosecutor should be able to get a conviction on this evidence." Rosa explained that Derek would be charged with attempted murder in the first degree, which carried a potential sentence of 15 years to life in prison. Additional charges related to the poisoning attempts, threats against Sarah, and the conspiracy with Harold Braxton could add decades to his sentence. What happens to Sarah and the children? "They'll need to stay in protective custody until we can identify and arrest Derek's loan shark contacts. But based on what Sarah has told us, those men were primarily using Derek's family as leverage. With Derek in custody and unable to pay anyway, they'll likely move on to other targets." The practical aspects of Derek's downfall were still sinking in. My son would probably spend the rest of his life in prison. My grandchildren would grow up without their father. Sarah would have to rebuild her life as a single mother. But we were all alive, and Derek's desperate gamble had failed completely. Mrs. Henderson, there's one more thing you should know. Harold Braxton has been arrested as well. We found evidence that he's been targeting elderly property owners throughout the county, encouraging family members to pressure them into quick sales. Your case exposed a much larger pattern of elder abuse and financial exploitation. At least some good would come from this nightmare. Other families would be protected from the kind of manipulation and violence that Derek and Braxton had attempted. As Rosa prepared to leave, she handed me a card with Victim Services contact information. You're going to need support getting through the trial and dealing with the trauma of what your son put you through. Don't try to handle this alone. After the police left, I sat in my quiet kitchen trying to process everything that had happened. In the span of 2 weeks, I'd discovered my son was trying to kill me, gathered evidence of his crimes, and watched him get arrested for attempted murder. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed midnight. Technically, it was a new day, but it felt like the end of a very long and dark chapter in my life. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal proceedings, media attention, and family upheaval. Derek's arrest made front-page news in our small town with headlines like, "Local man arrested for trying to poison mother," and "Inheritance murder plot exposed." The preliminary hearing was held 10 days after Derek's arrest. I sat in the courtroom watching my son dressed in an orange jumpsuit and shackles as the prosecutor outlined the charges against him. Attempted murder in the first-degree conspiracy to commit murder assault with a deadly weapon, elder abuse, and fraud. Derek had hired a public defender, a young woman named Lisa Chen, who seemed overwhelmed by the mountain of evidence against her client. She attempted to argue that Derek's gambling addiction constituted a mental health issue that should be considered during sentencing, but the judge was unimpressed. Mr. Henderson, the court recognizes that addiction can impair judgment, but it does not excuse planning and executing multiple attempts to murder your mother over several months. Judge Patricia Williams stated firmly, "This was not an impulsive act committed during a moment of poor judgment. This was a calculated scheme to commit murder for financial gain." Derek pled guilty to all charges, probably on his lawyer's advice, that fighting the case would only result in a harsher sentence. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and going to trial would have meant subjecting our family to months of additional publicity and trauma. The sentencing hearing was held 3 weeks later. Sarah, Emma, and Lucas sat with me in the front row as family members and friends testified about Derek's character and the impact of his actions on our community. Derek's former colleagues from the pharmaceutical company testified about his theft of controlled substances and his increasingly erratic behavior in the months before his arrest. Harold Braxton, facing his own charges for elder abuse conspiracy, had agreed to testify against Derek in exchange for a reduced sentence. Derek Henderson approached me last fall with a proposition, Braxton testified. He said his mother was elderly and in poor health, and he expected to inherit her property soon. He wanted to arrange a quick sale immediately after her death to avoid probate complications. The prosecutor asked Braxton to clarify the timeline of these discussions. Mr. Henderson was very specific about timing. He said his mother would likely pass away within the next 6 months, and he wanted all the paperwork ready so we could close the sale within days of her death. Braxton's testimony proved that Derek had been planning my murder almost a year in advance, systematically setting up the financial mechanisms to profit from my death. Sarah took the stand to describe the emotional and psychological abuse Derek had subjected her and the children to during his murder planning. Derek became a different person over the past year, she said through tears. He was angry all the time, secretive about money, and he started making threats about taking the children away if I asked too many questions. I knew something was wrong, but I never imagined he was capable of trying to kill his own mother. The children did not testify, but Child Protective Services submitted a report documenting the trauma they'd experienced. Emma had been having nightmares and refusing to eat chocolate. Lucas had been asking repeatedly whether his father was coming home and whether I was safe. When it came time for Derek to address the court, he stood up slowly and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "Your Honor, I know there's nothing I can say that will excuse what I did. I tried to kill my mother for money, and I put my wife and children through hell because of my own mistakes." Derek's voice broke as he continued. "I want everyone to know that my mother didn't deserve any of this. She's a good person who worked hard her whole life, and I betrayed every value she tried to teach me." He turned to look at me directly. "Mom, I know you'll probably never forgive me, and I don't expect you to. But I hope someday Emma and Lucas can understand that my actions don't reflect who they are or what they're capable of becoming." Judge Williams listened to Derek's statement without visible emotion, then delivered his sentence. "Derek Henderson, this court has rarely seen a case involving such calculated cruelty toward a family member. You spent months planning your mother's murder, made multiple attempts to poison her, and were prepared to shoot her when your other methods failed." The judge paused, looking directly at Derek. "Your gambling addiction may explain how you got into financial trouble, but it does not excuse your decision to solve that problem through murder. The court sentences you to 25 years to life in prison for attempted murder, with additional consecutive sentences for the conspiracy and assault charges. You will be eligible for parole consideration after serving 30 years. Derek would be 68 years old before he could even be considered for parole. Emma and Lucas would be adults with their own families by the time their father might potentially be released." As the bailiff led Derek away, he looked back at us one final time. I saw the boy I'd raised somewhere in his eyes, but I also saw the stranger he'd become. The son who'd tried to kill me was gone forever, replaced by a convicted felon who would spend the rest of his productive life in prison. After the sentencing, Sarah and I took the children out for ice cream and tried to explain what would happen next. "Is Daddy coming home for Christmas?" Lucas asked. "No, sweetheart. Daddy did something very wrong, and he has to stay in a special place for a long time to think about his mistakes." Emma, who was old enough to understand more of the situation, asked the harder question. "Grandma Phyllis, did Daddy really try to hurt you?" "Yes, Emma. Your daddy was in trouble and made some very bad choices. But that doesn't mean he doesn't love you and Lucas. Sometimes people we love do things that disappoint us." "Are you safe now?" she asked. "I'm very safe. And you and your brother and your mama are safe too." That evening, after Sarah and the children had gone home to their temporary housing provided by Victim Services, I sat in my kitchen thinking about everything that had changed. The farm felt different now, no longer the peaceful refuge it had been during my marriage to Frank. Every room held memories of Derek's deception and the 2 weeks I'd spent gathering evidence of his murder plot. But it was still my home, and I wasn't going to let his actions drive me away from the life I'd built. Margaret Hendricks had helped me establish legal protections to prevent any future family members from pressuring me about the property. The farm would eventually go to Emma and Lucas through a trust that couldn't be accessed until they were 30 years old, ensuring they would be mature enough to make wise decisions about their inheritance. I'd also set up financial support for Sarah to complete her education and establish a career that would allow her to provide for the children independently. Derek's actions had left his family financially devastated, but they wouldn't have to struggle because of his mistakes. 3 months after Derek's sentencing, Detective Rosa Valdez visited to update me on the broader investigation that had grown out of my case. We've identified 17 other families that Harold Braxton targeted with similar schemes over the past 5 years, Rosa explained. In most cases, he convinced family members to pressure elderly relatives into quick property sales by claiming declining health or safety concerns. Were there other attempted murders? Not that we've found evidence of, but there were several cases of financial abuse and emotional manipulation. Your case was unusual because Derek was desperate enough to resort to actual violence. Rosa told me that Braxton had pled guilty to elder abuse charges and received a 10-year prison sentence. His real estate company had been dissolved, and the state had established new regulations requiring additional oversight for property sales involving elderly owners. Mrs. Henderson, your courage in gathering evidence and testifying probably prevented other families from going through similar experiences. 6 months after Derek's sentencing, Sarah graduated from veterinary technician school and got a job at the animal hospital in the county seat. Emma and Lucas were doing well in counseling and had started visiting me regularly again, though it took time for them to feel comfortable in the house where they'd witnessed their father's arrest. Sarah often brought the children to help with farm chores on weekends, and slowly we began building new family traditions that didn't revolve around Derek's presence. Emma showed a real aptitude for caring for the chickens and cattle, while Lucas loved driving the old tractor around the property. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset over the cornfields, Emma asked me a question that had clearly been weighing on her mind. "Grandma Phyllis, do you hate my daddy for what he did?" I thought carefully about my answer. Derek had tried to kill me, had put his own children through trauma, and had destroyed our family's sense of security. But he was still the little boy I'd rocked to sleep and cheered at baseball games. No, sweetheart, I don't hate your daddy. I'm very disappointed in the choices he made, and I'm sad that he let his problems turn him into someone who could hurt people he loved. But hate takes too much energy, and I'd rather use my energy loving you and Lucas and your mama. Do you think he's sorry? I think your daddy is sorry he got caught, and I think he's sorry about the consequences of his actions. Whether he's truly sorry for trying to hurt me, I honestly don't know. But that's something he'll have to figure out for himself. Emma nodded solemnly, seeming to understand that adult relationships and emotions are complicated in ways that don't always have simple explanations. A year after Derek's sentencing, I received a letter from him in prison. The envelope had been opened and inspected by prison officials, and Sarah had read it first to make sure it didn't contain threats or manipulation. The letter was surprisingly brief. "Mom, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I wanted you to know that I think about what I did every day. I've been working with a counselor here who specializes in addiction and family violence. I'm starting to understand how my gambling problem turned into something much worse, and how I convinced myself that hurting you was somehow justified. I don't expect forgiveness, and I'm not asking you to visit or write back. I just wanted you to know that I realize now how wrong I was and how much damage I did to everyone I claim to love. Please tell Sarah and the kids that I love them and that I hope they can build a good life without the chaos I brought into our family. Derek." I read the letter twice, looking for signs of manipulation or self-pity, but it seemed genuinely remorseful. Whether Derek's change of heart was real or simply another attempt to manipulate people's emotions, I couldn't tell. But it no longer mattered to my daily life. I folded the letter and put it in my desk drawer. Someday, when Emma and Lucas were older, they might want to read it and form their own opinions about their father's character and motivations. But for now, our focus was on building a healthy future together. The truth was that Derek's attempt to murder me had ultimately brought our remaining family closer together and taught us all valuable lessons about recognizing and responding to manipulation and abuse. Sarah had become more confident and assertive. Emma and Lucas had learned that they could survive difficult circumstances and still find joy in their daily lives. And I had learned that my own strength and intelligence were more powerful than I'd ever realized. At 65 years old, I'd been able to outsmart a desperate killer, gather evidence that led to his conviction, and protect the family members he'd been threatening. Derek's plan had been to make me a victim. Instead, he'd turned me into a survivor and an advocate for others facing similar threats. 2 years have passed since Derek's sentencing, and life on the farm has settled into new rhythms that feel both familiar and completely different. The physical scars of his betrayal have faded, but the emotional healing has been a longer journey for all of us. Sarah completed her veterinary technician program with honors and now works full-time at the county animal hospital. She's become one of their most valued employees, specializing in large animal care that requires her to visit farms throughout the region. The independence and confidence she's gained from building her own career has been remarkable to watch. Emma, now 14, has grown into a thoughtful young woman who helps me manage the farm's financial records and has started a small business selling fresh eggs and vegetables at the local farmers market. She's talking about studying agricultural business in college, with dreams of modernizing small family farms to make them more sustainable and profitable. Lucas, 11, now has inherited his grandfather Frank's mechanical aptitude and spends his afternoons rebuilding an old tractor engine with guidance from our neighbor, Mr. Patterson. His trauma from witnessing Derek's arrest has largely healed, though he still occasionally asks questions about why his father made such terrible choices. The legal aftermath of Derek's case continued long after his sentencing. Harold Braxton served 18 months in prison before being released on parole, but his real estate license was permanently revoked, and he was required to pay restitution to the families he'd targeted. The investigation into his schemes led to new state regulations protecting elderly property owners from high-pressure sales tactics. Derek's loan shark contacts were eventually identified and arrested on racketeering charges. Detective Rosa Valdez told me that breaking up that criminal organization prevented other desperate people from being trapped in the same cycle of escalating debt and violence that had consumed my son. I've used my experience to become an advocate for elder abuse prevention, speaking at community centers and law enforcement training sessions about recognizing the warning signs of family financial manipulation. The irony that Derek's attempt to make me a victim ultimately gave me a platform to protect other vulnerable seniors isn't lost on me. Margaret Hendricks helped me establish the Frank Henderson Foundation for Elder Protection, funded partly by the life insurance Derek had taken out on me without my knowledge. The foundation provides legal assistance to elderly people facing family pressure to sell property or change their estate plans under suspicious circumstances. The foundation has helped 37 families over the past 2 years, preventing financial abuse, and in 3 cases uncovering schemes that might have escalated to physical violence. Each success feels like a way of transforming Derek's evil intentions into something that protects and empowers other people. Sarah and the children live in the renovated guest house on the farm, giving them independence while keeping our family close together. We've created new traditions that honor Frank's memory while building positive experiences for Emma and Lucas to replace their traumatic memories of Derek's arrest. Sunday dinners are once again warm family gatherings, but now they include Sarah's mother and sister who've become part of our extended support network. We talk openly about Derek's absence and its impact on our lives, but we don't let his choices define our future happiness. The farm itself has become more productive and profitable than it's been in decades. With Emma's business acumen and Lucas's mechanical skills, we've diversified into organic vegetables and free-range chickens, creating multiple revenue streams that ensure the property's long-term sustainability. More importantly, the farm has become a symbol of resilience and renewal. Instead of being the scene of an attempted murder, it's now a place where 3 generations of women are building independent, meaningful lives while supporting each other through challenges and celebrating each other's successes. I still receive occasional letters from Derek in prison, usually around holidays or the children's birthdays. The letters have become less self-pitying and more focused on expressing genuine remorse for his actions. His prison counselor has written to inform me that Derek is participating in addiction recovery programs and has become a mentor to younger inmates struggling with gambling problems. Whether Derek's apparent rehabilitation is genuine or simply another manipulation, I may never know for certain. But I've learned that my healing doesn't depend on his redemption. I can acknowledge that the little boy I raised still exists somewhere inside the man who tried to kill me, while also accepting that his choices have permanently changed our relationship. Emma and Lucas ask occasionally about visiting their father in prison, and I've told them that decision will be theirs to make when they're adults. For now, they're building their identities around positive influences and healthy relationships, which is exactly what children their age should be doing. The financial security Derek was so desperate to steal has been preserved and enhanced through careful planning and smart investments. Emma and Lucas will inherit a thriving agricultural operation, along with educational trust funds that will allow them to pursue whatever careers call to them. But more importantly, they're inheriting a legacy of courage, honesty, and resilience. They've seen how family members can support each other through crises, how truth and justice ultimately prevail over deception and violence, and how people can choose to transform trauma into strength. On quiet evenings, I often sit on the front porch where Derek once made phone calls about my supposed death, and I reflect on how dramatically our lives have changed. The sound of Emma and Lucas laughing as they chase chickens around the yard, the sight of Sarah reading veterinary journals by lamplight, the knowledge that 3 families have been protected from financial abuse through our foundation's work. These are the victories that matter. Derek's plan was to eliminate me so he could inherit money and property. Instead, his failed murder attempt strengthened our family bonds, created opportunities for Sarah and the children to build independent lives, and gave me a purpose that extends far beyond our farm's boundaries. The most profound lesson I've learned through this ordeal is that self-worth and family loyalty cannot be measured in monetary terms. Derek was so focused on the financial value of our farm that he lost sight of its true worth as a place where love, tradition, and values are passed from one generation to the next. True wealth lies in relationships built on mutual respect and genuine care for each other's well-being. Money and property are tools that can enhance life when used wisely, but they become destructive when they're pursued through betrayal and violence. I've also learned that setting boundaries and standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary for protecting not just your own welfare, but the welfare of everyone who depends on you. If I'd allowed Derek to intimidate me into silence or submission, Sarah and the children would have lost their chance at building healthy, independent lives. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give our families is refusing to be victims of their worst impulses. By gathering evidence of Derek's crimes and ensuring he faced consequences for his actions, I protected Emma and Lucas from growing up in a household where manipulation and threats were normalized. The farm continues to thrive under our careful stewardship, but more importantly, it's become a place where 3 generations of strong women are writing a new chapter of our family's story. Emma is learning that intelligence and hard work create more lasting security than inherited wealth. Lucas is discovering that he can build and fix things with his own hands, giving him confidence that he can solve problems through effort and creativity rather than shortcuts or manipulation. Sarah has found her voice and her strength, after years of being controlled and threatened by Derek. Watching her transformation from a frightened, submissive wife into a confident professional and protective mother has been one of the most inspiring aspects of our recovery from Derek's betrayal. As I prepare to celebrate my 67th birthday next month, I'm planning a party that will include not just our immediate family, but also Detective Rosa Valdez, Margaret Hendricks, and several families we've helped through the foundation. We're celebrating not just another year of life, but another year of using that life to create positive change in our community. Derek will spend this birthday like all the others for the next several decades in a prison cell reflecting on the choices that led him there. I hope he's genuinely working on understanding and changing the mindset that allowed him to see murder as an acceptable solution to his problems. But whether Derek ever achieves true redemption is ultimately his responsibility, not mine. My responsibility is to continue building a life worth living, protecting the people I love, and using my experience to help others avoid the trauma our family endured. The chocolates Derek sent me were meant to be my final meal. Instead, they became the first clue in an investigation that saved my life and protected countless other families from similar threats. Sometimes the very weapon someone uses against you becomes the tool of your salvation. I want to end by asking those of you who've listened to my story, have you ever noticed warning signs of manipulation or financial pressure from family members? Have you trusted your instincts when something felt wrong, even if you couldn't prove it? The comments below are a safe place to share your experiences and support each other. Please hit the like button if this story resonated with you. Subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family betrayal, and share this video with anyone who might benefit from learning about elder abuse warning signs. Thank you for listening to my story with such care and attention. I hope it helps you recognize your own strength and trust your own wisdom when facing difficult family situations. Remember that you deserve to be treated with respect and kindness, no matter what relationship challenges you're facing. Stay strong, stay safe, and never underestimate your ability to protect yourself and the people you love.